Bitcoin definitely can become the reserve currency of the world.
Bitcoin is a joke.
You're going to see a move away from the dollar towards something more politically neutral.
If they kill the ruble overnight, they could kill Bitcoin tomorrow.
You don't understand centralization, decentralization. I've written a technical book on this topic, and I'm an expert on this stuff.
Jimmy, keep your hat on. Welcome to the show where the big names battle it out over the big questions. And today, that is, could Bitcoin replace the US dollar as the world reserve asset? It might sound crazy, but many believe Bitcoin will one day give the buck the boot. Joining us to debate this are two Goliaths of the crypto and financial worlds. On one side, from the wild west of crypto, he is the legendary Bitcoin developer, the best-selling author, and the professor of programming from the University of Texas, Jimmy Song.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And facing him is a true titan of TradFi. He is a former Bank of America analyst, a top exec, and someone voted one of the smartest people on Wall Street. It's David Wu.
Thanks for having me on.
Coming up, we debate, has the dollar's time come? Could Bitcoin take its place? And the question of regulation. The world reserve currency is the safe haven of the global economy. It is used by central banks, governments, and institutions for trade and settlement across the world. And for nearly 80 years, the US dollar has held this position. But could Bitcoin take its place? Let's find out. So, Jimmy and David, it's great to have you with us. To kick things off before we get into the meat of the debate, I'm going to give you each a minute for your opening arguments. So, could Bitcoin replace the US dollar? Jimmy, let's hear from you first.
Yeah, I believe that Bitcoin definitely can become the reserve currency of the world, and we don't know exactly when that will happen, but I think it's inevitable because it is the hardest money, the scarcest asset, and it is, more importantly, protects you against inflation and confiscation, two things that are very prominent in today's world. I believe that the dollar is not long for this world. We saw already how they essentially canceled Russians out of the dollar system. There is almost zero chance that Russia will be using the dollar as a reserve currency again after what's happened with Ukraine. So I believe that something will be replacing it, and the harder the asset, the more desirable it is. They're already talking about stuff like gold. I think Bitcoin is an even harder asset. It's just that the world hasn't caught up to its digital scarce nature because of the gerontocracy that we live under. So that's my argument for why Bitcoin will become the world reserve currency eventually.
Great stuff. Thank you, Jimmy. Okay, David, it's over to you. Your minute starts now.
Great. So I'm obviously going to take the side of the US dollar. The dollar just hit a 20-year high, whereas Bitcoin is down 50% from the high. So I think at the end of the day, you know what? There's no doubt price action. I think it's basically moving in favor of the US dollar. But I think there's a bigger point here. I mean, in response to Jimmy's point, number one, about the fact that there's limited supply when it comes to Bitcoin. Well, that is not true, strictly speaking, because if you start thinking about cryptocurrencies as an entire asset class, because everybody can go out there and tomorrow start issuing Bitcoin number 2, 3, 4, 5, basically a poodle, basically Bitcoin, a Japanese dog Bitcoin, whatever it is. So from that point of view, I think, the whole notion that cryptocurrencies, basically have the benefit of having limited supply, whereas fiat currencies could be printed, I just simply think is completely untrue. Secondly, I think it's also untrue that, that basically that Bitcoin cannot get confiscated, because there's no doubt that, already over the last 2-3 years, because of the legalization of basically Bitcoin, basically a lot of brokerages, basically anybody who's trading Bitcoin now have to basically go through all the entire anti-money laundering basically regulation, which means that Bitcoin can no longer be used to launder money. So from that point of view, it can be confiscated. There was a time, there was no doubt that cryptocurrency had the advantage of being able to, anonymous.
David, let me stop you there. We're going to get into a lot of these points in the debate. just so we give you both a minute to kick things off. Now, let me lay some ground rules out. I can see we might need these. There are 3 big topics, and for each one, you'll have roughly 3 minutes to put forward your side of the debate before taking each other to task. All make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get into this with a bang regarding the buck. Now, there are many that think the buck's back is against the wall, with 80% of all dollars having been printed in the last 2 years, and inflationary fears, along with exacerbating wealth inequality. What is going on with the dollar? Jimmy, I am going to start with you again first. We will switch orders, but I'll come to you first. Is the dollar's time up? Over to you.
Yeah, I see it as sort of showing what the actual mechanics of the dollar are. We had the inflation print of 8.3%, and they actually had to manipulate a bunch of the variables in order for it to come in at 8.3%. They changed the way that the used cars or new cars are counted, something like that. There were a bunch of different knobs that they were turning to make sure that the inflation looked like it was under control, when in fact inflation is out of control. If you look at the M2 money supply from the beginning of 2020, it was somewhere around 15 trillion. It's currently sitting at around 22 trillion. That's a $7 trillion increase, almost 50% over the last 2.5 years. That's an insane amount of monetary debasement that's been occurring. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are turning to Bitcoin. And I will sort of like respond to David's point about crypto and Bitcoin. That's like confusing, steel for gold or something like that. They're completely different things. Altcoins are complete crap. They are mostly Ponzi schemes. They're ways that VCs use to take advantage of retail. Bitcoin is the only one that's actually decentralized, and I reject this argument that altcoins are the same as Bitcoin. Go try trading, one Shiba Inu for 1 Bitcoin. That's not going to happen because Shiba Inu is worth much, much less, and they can print as much of it as they want. As far as confiscation, if you do leave it on an exchange, David's absolutely right. It can be confiscated, and Coinbase put out a 10K saying that if you leave your coins on their exchange and they go bankrupt, then you're only a debt holder in bankruptcy, something like that. But one of the nice things about Bitcoin is that you can self-custody. You can take those coins out of an exchange and put it on a hardware wallet or your mnemonic seed phrase or whatever. And that means at that point, it's going to be very, very difficult to confiscate. As far as AML KYC laws for legal transactions, absolutely, David is right. For the most part, they require a lot of that, especially if you're buying from a US exchange. But there are many situations where you can actually use it without going through a US exchange. In fact, I was down in El Salvador a few months ago. You can go and pay for stuff in Lightning. No one knows anything about the transactions that you do. It's none of their business. It's a bilateral transaction. And for those reasons, it's a wonderful device against government tyranny and the direction that every central bank seems to want to go to, which is towards a CBDC, which increases surveillance. A lot of people are going to resist that. They don't want the government in their business, and I believe that Bitcoin, for that reason, will have an attractiveness, despite the DXY index going up very high. There is clearly a large demand for the dollar because of the quantitative tightening that the Fed is practicing. But over a long time period, it's clear that that Bitcoin is a much scarcer asset than the dollar.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy. Thank you very much. Time's up on that side now. David, let's go to you then. Is the dollar's time up? What do you have to say?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I don't deny that the US dollar has got lots of problems, right? The US is running a massive current account deficit, massive, budget deficit, inflation's at a 40-year high. These are problems that are well known. However, I would argue that, for, any currency or Bitcoin for that matter to replace the US dollar, it has to basically do two things, because there's no doubt what makes a reserve currency special are two unique attributes. Number one, okay, that the currency needs to be basically provide, essentially shelter during periods of turmoil. In other words, it has to act like a safe haven. Now, I don't have to tell you right now, at this moment, stock market is falling, bond market is falling, recessionary fears are going up, there's a war going on, and yet the US dollar is up basically massively at a 20-year high. It tells you that basically, once again, when people have any doubt about basically, the investment universe, the outlook, they pile into the US dollar. And I think that is worth a lot, because the dollar is the only thing that's going up while everything's going down. And I think that's a very important attribute for any reserve currency. Now, the second attribute that you need for a reserve currency is the ability to produce consistent and stable returns. Guess what? The US stock market has been the best performing stock market in the world 9 out of the last 10 years. Talking about consistency and stability. Now, no other country can basically claim that, because no other country can even begin to basically compete with the US in terms of the track record of being a very successful economy, not to mention being a very dominant economy. Now, I don't have to tell you that Bitcoin, goes up, goes down on a sharp, basically ratio basis. In other words, adjusted for, volatility, the returns are terrible. So from that point of view, again, with all the problems the US dollar has, as long as basically the dollar can provide people with a safe haven during periods of uncertainty, and that it can produce basically constant and stable returns over time, that the dollar remains basically unbeatable in terms of its reserve currency status.
Okay, Jimmy, let's pick up a couple of those things just so you can respond here. So, Bitcoin, is it a safe haven right now? And if we take David's point of, a reserve currency needs to provide shelter, where are we? What are your views on that?
Yeah, I think David confuses cause and effect. Those are the effects of being a reserve currency already. Those are not the reasons why it became a reserve currency. The reason why the US dollar is a reserve currency of the world is really a historical anomaly. The reason is because at the end of World War II, during the Bretton Woods conference, the US happened to have most of the world's gold stockpile, and they were able to impose a monetary world order as a result of having most of the money on their shores. And that's really the reason why it became the reserve currency. The reason that it's a safe haven now and that it gets consistent returns is because it's a reserve currency, not the cause. So David is mixing the two up here in this argument. I will say that Bitcoin has been volatile, but over a period of 5 years, the returns have been way better than the stock market. And if that's the metric that he's going on. And the volatility of the stock market, especially particular stocks like Tesla, Peloton, Netflix, or whatever, Bitcoin's actually been less volatile than a lot of those things, which have drawn down like 60, 70, 80%, and maybe even 90, I think, for Peloton and stuff like that. So for him to say that it needs consistent returns in order to be a reserve currency, well, returns in terms of what? In terms of Bitcoin, it's been terrible. The dollar has been absolutely horrible in terms of almost all assets, actually, like over the past 2 years. If you look at the prices of almost anything, and this is what inflation actually measures, is how much more does it cost right now? Again, we had an 8.3% print. Things are getting way more expensive after the government manipulates these metrics using hedonic goods adjustment or hedonic quality adjustment or whatever knobs that they turn in order to make it look as low as possible. That to me
Jimmy,
tells me that it's way more
that.
volatile than David thinks, and he needs to admit that if he's going to measure it in this way.
Okay, well, just to pick up on that, there's a couple of points there, but maybe in relation to what you just said there, David, how much of the S&P's growth is due to inflation, in Jimmy's words there, sort of summarizing, caused by this money printing or excessive creation of money?
Right. Now think about this. I mean, By the way, the dollar's reserve currency status is not like it's written down anywhere. It's not written, there's no contract. It's not like the world all of a sudden decided, okay, fine, the dollar is going to be a reserve currency. We're going to sign an international treaty as such. There's no such thing, especially after 1973 with the breakdown of Bretton Woods system. The dollar has to earn its reserve currency status every single day. So this whole notion that basically, because the dollar is a reserve currency, therefore is producing like, consistent, stable return, that's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I'll tell you why the dollar US stock market has been the best performing stock market 9 out of the last 10 years, is because the best performing stocks in general have been tech stocks in the last 10 years. And most tech stocks are basically US companies. They are priced in US dollar. In other words, if you want to invest in those companies, you have to, first of all, buy the US dollar. So I think from that point of view, there's no question. Again, the dollar just a symbol. It's just a reflection of the US economy. What I'm saying is that the US economy enjoys a very, very dominant status. And this is why the dollar is basically strong. And it's not because everybody thinks, oh, well, we want the dollar to be strong, we want the dollar to be a reserve currency, because the euro was set up to undercut the dollar's reserve currency status. The RMB, many people have been hoping that was going to replace the US dollar as a reserve currency. None of these two currencies have managed to really even get even close. So I think from that point of view, it's because the US remains basically unsurpassed in terms of its economic dominance. I think in general, again, if you think about the way Bitcoin actually trades. This is the most amazing thing. If you look at the correlation of Bitcoin, Bitcoin trades with two things. Bitcoin trades, number one, with NASDAQ. NASDAQ 100, basically, Bitcoin essentially has almost like an 80% correlation last year with NASDAQ 100. It tells you that, it's correlated with tech stocks. Well, if it's correlated with tech stocks, you might as well buy tech stocks. The whole point about reserve currency is that it should not be correlated with anything. And yet, basically, Bitcoin not only is correlated with tech stock, is basically correlated with negative correlated with US real yields. It tells you that, so from that point of view, it's very easy to replicate, actually, the investment profile of Bitcoin. Whereas it's extremely difficult to actually replicate the profile of the US dollar in terms of its correlation with other markets.
Okay, all right.
I'd love to see something that gets 100x returns in 9 years. But yeah, I mean, like show me a NASDAQ, index fund that'll do that, and I'll show you probably a scam.
But again, the point here is that I think the question we have to ask ourselves. I was the first Wall Street analyst to initiate coverage on Bitcoin back in 2013, and people thought I was insane back then, because I thought that Bitcoin actually does serve a worthwhile basically role as a basically to actually basically challenge the conventional payment system. And by the way, over the last 10 years, the traditional payment system has improved dramatically. These days, you can basically transfer money to somebody else, literally basically over just using an email. Okay, that's how fast, incredible this thing is now. Now, I think the point here is I'm not saying, Bitcoin, sure, it's gone up a lot, but I would argue a lot of it has to do with basically the speculation. Basically, people being deluded into thinking that this thing actually is going to make you rich one day. So I generally don't see that. The fact that Bitcoin has returned, is because of the speculative, basically, fervor that has basically overtaken the entire basic crypto world. Whereas, Bitcoin really hasn't produced anything that's measurable, quantifiable, for that matter. I mean, what has basically Bitcoin produced in terms of making our lives better, raising the standard of living for everybody around the world? To me, not clear at all.
Yeah, to me, what you're arguing is very much from a dollar perspective, and it's clear that you seem to think that the U.S. has some sort of exceptionalism, and that the tech companies are doing something uniquely important in the world and so on, and not as a result of being the dominant world currency. The reason why the U.S. has so much wealth is because they are the reserve currency. Whenever they print money, whenever they have trade deficits, they can essentially print money for all those goods and services from other countries. The reason why people from Central America, for example, illegally immigrate to the United States is because of the monetary realities of the localities that they're they're in. If they go to the US, they can make a lot more money. And this is something that we've known for hundreds of years. Richard Cantillon in 1720 noted that when you have a money printer, all of the manufacturing jobs go out of that country into other places because labor is simply cheaper. It's not a result of US being particularly innovative. I actually don't think that, there's certainly some innovation going on in the US, but it's not particularly innovative that, everyone's trying to get into the dollar just so they could invest in Facebook. I reject that entirely. The reason why people are in the dollar is because that's a global settlement currency. The reason why they're in the dollar is because in order to buy oil, you have to have the dollar. The reason why they're in the dollar is because that's what everyone else uses. It's a mass psychology game, a speculation game that David was alluding to. And because of what's happened in Ukraine and Russia, particularly with all of the Russian citizens that have been denied access to their dollars that they own, what we're going to see is Russia getting off of the dollar, which they already have. They now only sell their natural gas to Europe for rubles. And they're going to have bilateral relationships with places like China. China's already trying to do that with many parts of Africa, where they're trying to settle not in the dollar but in the RMB. There's going to be a lot of reserve currency stuff that's going to go away from the dollar.
Jimmy, keep your hat on, Jimmy. We got to jump in. Listen, what I think we've got is a bit of a dispute over the dollar. So let's move on to our next topic, which David alluded to anyway, which is all about Bitcoin and what does it actually do. So let's start, first of all, with what's a reserve asset? Well, it's used by central banks and institutions to settle trade globally without the need for exchange rates. So if you put forward the argument for Bitcoin being a open system, a fair, neutral system, a medium of exchange, something that's 24/7 and is borderless, it would seem like potentially it'd be a good fit. David, I am going to come to you first as you raised this point in the last section. Bitcoin will be the next reserve currency.
I think it's very unlikely. In fact, it's extremely unlikely that Bitcoin is going to become the next reserve currency. Because for one thing, if it should ever get to that point that Bitcoin has become so basically popular, people really want it, that's when basically sovereigns, issuer of fiat currencies have a huge incentive to kill it at that point. And then we know they can kill it overnight. If they kill the ruble overnight, they could kill Bitcoin tomorrow. I mean, just like the Chinese did it, the Russians did it. All they have to do is just shut down exchanges and Bitcoin is finished. So from that point of view, it's actually interesting because you say, well, can basically Bitcoin challenge the US dollar? I would argue that that's almost an impossibility. That's a complete impossibility because the US will never allow it. And given that the US can kill Bitcoin overnight, you know what? I'm going to assume that it's fair to assume that basically Bitcoin never has a real shot. Now, I think the main thing is that, again, if you think about any asset that you own, whether it's a bond or a stock or a real estate, whatever, they generate income, okay? In fact, we price assets according to basically the projected future income that's basically produced by the asset you buy, right? If you buy the stock of a company, basically the companies generate earnings, it pays out dividend over time. If you buy a bond, it gives you coupon, that kind of thing. Guess what? So, if a company that gives you more dividend is gonna grow faster, sure, the stock price is gonna be higher, okay? Currency that's gonna pay you higher interest is gonna be basically stronger than currency that pay you no interest or zero interest for that matter. Bitcoin doesn't pay you anything. Bitcoin generates no returns, nothing. And yet prices have been going through the roof. So from that point of view, it's difficult to justify why basically all of a sudden Bitcoin should be considered even a real asset. Because guess what? Again, it doesn't serve any purpose other than as a vehicle for speculation for most people. And that's a reality. Again, if you're looking for something that's a store of value, listen, I mean, from that point of view, there are stocks, there are lots of other assets. As I said before, Bitcoin will be only unique if you cannot somehow replicate its return profile. And yet it's very easy to replicate its return profile, even though it produces nothing. So I think all in all, this is my biggest basically problem with Bitcoin, which is that yes, blockchain is a very useful thing, it's a very smart thing. Whoever invented Bitcoin clearly was a genius, no doubt about that. And I hope that guy basically made a lot of money. But again, if you think about what Bitcoin really does, other than the fact that it's got all these basically ingenious bells and whistles, the fact it's complex and a great idea doesn't mean it's a reserve currency. It's not even basically clear that it's even an asset for that matter.
Thank you, David. We got you going there, didn't we? That was good to see. Jimmy, Bitcoin came in for a bit of a kick in there. Over to you to respond.
Yeah, so a lot of points I think David's completely mistaken on. He thinks that sovereigns can kill it, and he brought up the example of China and how they shut down Bitcoin because they shut down Chinese exchanges. This is if that's the example that he's going to be giving, that's actually a great example of how Bitcoin survives regardless of what government does. This is one of the most authoritarian countries in the world, and yet Bitcoin survives there. There's a lot of people that own Bitcoin because it is a bearer instrument, unlike a stock or a bond or any of these registered instruments where you have to use a central authority. You can own it yourself. You could have it on a hardware wallet. You could have it on your phone, whatever it is. And what happened in China was actually very illustrative. They first shut down the exchanges and people started trading peer-to-peer using local Bitcoins. They shut down the local Bitcoins website. Then people started using Telegram and WeChat groups to go and trade. People still do that to this day. As much as the Chinese government tries to quote unquote shut it down and kill it, it hasn't been able to do that. And in fact, they banned it in some way, shape, or form, something like 15 times from 2013 to 2017. And if you include the mining ban in the last couple of years, then that's another one too. But it doesn't seem to affect Bitcoin in the sense that, hey, like you kick all of these people out, people find a way around it. So I reject this notion that it's so easy for governments to just kill it with a snap of a finger. That just isn't true. It's not a centralized system like a stock or a bond or something where you can just go and shut it down. The other thing that I want to point out is that he's saying, well, Bitcoin isn't an asset because it doesn't provide any returns or any dividends or anything like that. Would he consider Amazon an asset? Because they have never paid dividends. They don't have any plans to pay dividends, yet it's one of the highest flying stocks in the world. In a sense, all of these stocks have taken on monetary forms for that reason. Gold also doesn't provide any returns, right? But people value it, and that's why it's also an asset. This notion that it needs to provide a return in order for in order for it to be considered an asset is ridiculous on its face, because I've provided several counterexamples, and in today's society, it's very clear that a lot of things don't provide a return. In fact, it's better if your stock doesn't provide a dividend, because it's better as a growth stock. And lastly, this idea that you need to it's very easy to replicate Bitcoin's return profile. That is completely ridiculous. Maybe over the last year, there are certain NASDAQ stocks that you could have done, but over the last 10 years, it has gone up 100x. There are very few things that you can, and if you're an asset manager that got 100x over the last 10 years, you deserve some sort of award. But you've done this with Bitcoin. It's because of its absolute scarcity. 21 million is all the Bitcoin that there ever will be. So to make these statements that are obvious on its face to be false, it just feels like you're grasping at straws, David. Sorry, man.
Well, David, we saw you shaking your head there at several points. Do you want to dive in and respond to any of those?
Yeah. First of all, when I say that, it's easy to shut down Bitcoin overnight, I don't mean that the Chinese could shut down Bitcoin by itself, because clearly, there are a lot of other countries where basically Bitcoin exchanges continue to operate. That's why, the Chinese shutting down only basically prevent the Chinese from basically getting involved. But what I'm telling you is that the day will come when the US and Europe are gonna say, well, let's shut down basically Bitcoin. My only point is this, again, when Bitcoin starts to threaten the US dollar or the euro, okay, guess what? That's when Bitcoin's time is up, because if the Fed and then the US Treasury Secretary decides, you know what, we're going to shut it down, that will be over. So from that point of view, this has nothing to do with the Chinese or the Russians. I just gave you an example that they were able to shut down their exchanges overnight. But what I'm saying is that if Bitcoin in any way starts to threaten, basically the reserve currency issuers, because there's no doubt for the US, there's huge benefits, accruing to the US dollar as a reserve currency for the US. The US is never going to give that up. Just like they basically shut down the ruble, the Russian economy, they can do that to Bitcoin tomorrow if they feel threatened. So that's my point, that therefore, by definition, there is no way basically Bitcoin can ever challenge the US dollar, or even for that matter, the euro. Now, the second point I want to basically say is this: Amazon is it's a terrible example, a counterexample, simply because, as Jimmy just pointed out, growth stocks. What are growth stocks? Growth stocks are companies that are growing faster, because Amazon is making a lot of money, except they keep reinvesting their money to grow their market share. The reason why Amazon's stock price is high is because the market believes that down the road, by basically investing aggressively in their business, that Amazon is going to grow its market share, and down the road, it's going to make a lot of money because it's going to be the only game in town. So I think from that point of view, it's absolutely not true that Amazon's up there even though it produces nothing. In fact, the whole thing about the market, the way market thinks about financial asset prices, is based on expected future earnings. The market expects the likes of, basically Facebook, Google, and Amazon to produce a lot of earnings down the road. This is why these stock prices are up here. There is no way that Bitcoin ever is going to produce anything, not now, never in the future, never. So from that point of view, I just don't see how basically you can even begin to compare Bitcoin with basically the like of Amazon or any growth stocks for that matter.
I mean, you just said that if the U.S. and Europe shut it down, that it would be over. I completely disagree, because there will be jurisdictions that will accept all of the Bitcoiners, and there will continue to be a value assigned to them. And unless you have one world government that shuts it down all at the same time, you're always going to have some jurisdiction that's willing to take on the Bitcoiners. And even within the United States, there are going to be states that are going to say, you know what, we're going to give a safe haven to Bitcoiners over here. So it seems kind of ridiculous on its face that you can just sort of shut it down, and then that means that it'll go away because two governments decide that it's not going to go. And that's kind of the point. It's anti-fragile for that reason. And you gave this example of Amazon, which I thought was very interesting. You said that the price of it is based on people's expected future growth. Well, that's also the same for Bitcoin. It's priced according to how people think other people will adopt it, similar to gold and similar to a lot of other assets. And there are people that need gold or see gold. With a lot of commodities, people do this stuff. So your example actually proves my point that, like, if you are expecting, if you're not getting, you're clearly not earning any dividends off of Amazon, so it's not really producing anything. You're basically investing based on future growth potential, which is exactly why people are into Bitcoin. And to me, that's actually proving the same point that I'm making.
I think that's completely wrong. Think about this. Like, if you think about commodities, like, people buy iron ore because they think that, somebody else is going to basically buy iron ore down the road to basically build a car. So things actually go into production. Even gold. 25% of gold production every year goes towards jewelry. Okay, so from that point of view, even gold basically serves an economic purpose. I mean, Bitcoin is like air. And by the way, I completely challenge the notion that Bitcoin somehow is unique among all crypto assets. I mean, please, besides the fact it's the first, there is no reason to think that Bitcoin somehow is better than other basically crypto assets. I think a lot of people will probably challenge that.
Because you don't understand centralization, decentralization. I've written a technical book on this topic, and I'm an expert on this stuff. A lot of people like you
Anybody
that
can
don't
create that.
understand
Why don't you think
technology
that
say
anybody
stuff like that. It's
Bitcoin and if they call it something
Bitcoin.
else.
Right, guys,
The
I'm
fact
going
of
to
the
jump
matter
in just on
is
this
that
bit.
Bitcoin is unique among all of this stuff because it doesn't have a central foundation or a creator that's directing things. It does not make backwards incompatible software changes like all of this other stuff does. So you're completely wrong, and you don't understand the technology, period.
Okay, chaps, let's try and move on and let's pick up something that we were talking about there in terms of governments and their ability to kill Bitcoin. In relation to that, we're going to move on to our next topic, which is all about regulation. So, to become a global reserve asset, central banks and institutions, we would think, would need Bitcoin to be regulated in some shape or form. But will the impending government regulation of Bitcoin actually do more harm than good? David, let's start with you. Regulation and Bitcoin, how do you see it?
I think first of all, we have to first of all realize why is it until now there has been so little attempt at trying to regulate Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in general. I think it has largely to do with the fact that in the US at least, it's perceived that Bitcoin, sort of challenges the Wall Street monopoly. It takes on the banks. Therefore, politicians are reluctant to basically crack down on Bitcoin because they're seen as basically backing the big boys, the Wall Street, basically lobbyists and so on and so forth. But I think, but this is why they haven't cracked down harder on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. I think another reason is because it's seen as largely a US phenomenon. They sort of don't want to crack down on what they think could potentially be a source of innovation for the US. This is why they've been very careful. But I think things are starting to change. First of all, last year, China introduced, its own central bank digital currency. Now, guess what? Central bankers are like, they behave like herd. Now that the Chinese have got their own digital currency, guess what? The Americans must have their own digital currency as well, just like the Japanese recently started to talk about having their own. And all of a sudden, under this pressure to come up with their own digital currency, guess what? You heard what Biden said a few months ago. He's now commissioning a study about the need for regulatory environment for basically Bitcoin. My point here is this. In some sense, basically, when central bank digital currencies get rolled out, that will be the days that Bitcoins basically, days are numbered. Again, I'm not saying that Bitcoins will completely vanish. I'm just saying, like, at the end of the day, this debate is about whether the Bitcoin can challenge the dollar's reserve currency status. Bitcoin can still exist in some form, maybe trading in Salvador and North Korea. But my point here is that when central banks start to basically get their act together and roll out basically their own digital currency, I think they have a strong incentive at that point to crack down, whether it's through regulation or anything else matter, to basically really crack down on the relevance of basically all cryptocurrencies.
Okay, thank you, David. Jimmy, over to you in terms of regulation and, as David mentioned, CBDCs. Will either of these two spell the end for Bitcoin's chance to become a global reserve asset?
I think exactly the opposite of what he's saying. First of all, Bitcoin is already very regulated, whether David knows it or not. There's a lot of, if you go try to open a US exchange, you'll find out how regulated it all is and how much you have to do in terms of KYC and AML and all this other stuff in order to comply with all of the various rules and regulations around Bitcoin and other crypto assets and so on. With regard to his contention that CBDCs will mean the destruction of Bitcoin, I actually think the opposite. As soon as you get CBDCs, you will see Bitcoin usage skyrocket. And the reason is because CBDCs naturally have this surveillance function. If you have a single CBDC, essentially everybody has an account with the central bank, and you cut out all of these middle banks. Right now, you might have an account at Wells Fargo or Bank of America or something like that. All that gets eliminated. You have a direct account with the central bank, and they can take away and confiscate your money or give you money, or if they need to send you money for a stimulus or something like that, they can do that directly. And whatever taxes you need to file, it makes a lot of things efficient. And this is probably why China is going after it, but it also means that they know absolutely everything that you do. They kind of do already, and this is the direction that authoritarian governments go through. But if you want to do a transaction outside the purview of the government, outside what they want you to do, then you're going to use an alternate currency, because if the CBDC is your only choice, then of course, if you're doing something in the black market, you're not going to use that currency. And for that reason, I think Bitcoin usage will skyrocket. Ironically enough, as soon as you have a CBDC, people will go into Bitcoin en masse, because there's a lot of people that think it's creepy for the government to know what you're spending your money on. And for a lot of people, they'd rather have their freedom and privacy rather than have the government know absolutely everything that you're doing, and eventually cancel you because you wanted to donate some money to Canadian truckers or something.
Can I just basically answer that very quickly?
Yeah, of course, David. Yeah.
I think the point, but this is exactly the point. I mean, you got to basically think about this, right? I think I agree that CBDC, right now we say, oh, wow, CBDC is going to be an infringement on privacy, basically surveillance. We're going to basically all pile into Bitcoin. But you got to basically think about it. The reason why they're going to be rolling out central bank digital currency is down the road, guess what? Governments around the world are broke. They want to be able to take your money away. They want to be able to take 20% of your money away and put it somewhere to basically plug the hole. Now, if that's what they're going to do, you think they're going to encourage? They're going to see, oh, well, all these people are piling to Bitcoin, and we're somehow going to leave that alone? There's no way. So from that point of view, that would only accelerate the crackdown on Bitcoin exchanges. Now, I don't disagree. That means that probably more people will be keeping Bitcoin on their own digital wallet, that they're going to be transacting only with each other, maybe through some kind of barter system, I don't know what. But in terms of, again, we're talking about whether Bitcoin can challenge the dollar's reserve currency status. In order for Bitcoin to challenge the dollar's reserve currency status, it has to become internationalized. It has to become a major means of payment for everything from stocks, from bonds, for goods, and so on and so forth. That's not going to happen if you're only going to be able to, transfer money back and forth between two people. We'll never be able to see the light of day. So my point here is that, again, this is not about the death of Bitcoin. It's just that CBDC is going to spell the end of Bitcoin's run to challenge the dollar's reserve currency status.
Well, let's game that out a little bit, because if you're saying that, okay, these countries are going to shut down Bitcoin, there are other countries that are going to want all of those productive people, and they're going to go move there. And those economies are going to run on Bitcoin. They're going to have the reserve as Bitcoin, and they're going to trade with other countries that do it. And all those countries that have CBDCs, they're going to inflate the wealth and confiscate the wealth of their citizens. And so a lot of people are going to be tempted to leave, especially the richer people, because inevitably that's who the resources are going to be taken from. So the most productive and rich people are going to go to the places that are going to have Bitcoin as their reserve currency, like, say, El Salvador. It might not be a very big country right now, but as you get this game theory going, well, the CBDC countries are going to do much worse than the countries that have Bitcoin as a reserve currency. So as you keep going with this game theory, you're going to have more countries adopt it. There will be holdouts. I don't know, maybe the US and Europe are two of them. But the ones that adopt it, well, they're going to have a lot more prosperity, because you're going to get the rich people, the people that don't like having their wealth confiscated, the people that don't like having themselves surveilled by the government. Well, they're going to go to these places, and they're going to make a life there. They're going to start businesses there. They're going to invest there. That means that they're going to be more prosperous. So you'll see the proof in the pudding. So if you game it out, even according to your particular game theory or your future that you're saying, Bitcoin adoption will happen, and it looks like it'll be inevitable that Bitcoin will win.
Jimmy, basically read up on the history of offshore banking. Okay, offshore banking used to be very big, especially in the Caribbean. Guess what? They've all been completely wiped out. Okay, when the US, the Europeans, the Japanese got together and said, you know what, that's it. Even Switzerland had to basically give up on its banking secrecy law in order not to basically fall under basically the target of sanctions from the West. So what I'm just saying is that all these offshore countries have been completely wiped out overnight under the threat of sanctions and other punishments. I'm just telling you, any country can try that, but you know what? They would immediately come under basically the radar of the US and other countries that have every incentive to crack down on them.
And they've already done that to Russia. And the Russian economy, while suffering somewhat, they're still running, right? And the thing is, you can only cancel things so much before they sort of band together and go on it alone. If say China takes over Taiwan or has aggression against it, I'm sure the U.S. would do the same thing to China. Guess what? Russia and China are going to start settling in some other neutral currency, and you're going to see a move away from the dollar towards something more politically neutral. And I think Bitcoin is well positioned to take on that reserve role.
Okay, listen, we are nearly out of time. It has been fantastic hearing both your sides. I just want to give you both 1 minute at the end just to wrap up any last thoughts you have on this debate and what we've covered in it. So, Jimmy, I'll start with you before finishing with David. Let's go.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is clearly a new type of asset that not a lot of people understand. And I said at the beginning that the current financial system is a gerontocracy, which is a word that Peter Thiel introduced to show that, basically it's very old people that don't understand a lot of technology that are running things. I think as the younger people get older that actually do understand what digital transfer of value is like and what being politically neutral and decentralized all of these things mean, I think we'll see the dollar's demise because the people that are in power just don't really understand it. The people in Congress, for example, they can't even open like a PDF file, much less understand what blockchain technology is or anything like that. So I see this stuff as inevitable as generations turn over. I think people like David, unfortunately, are kind of part of that old guard that sees things a particular way. There's a whole new set of people that are coming in that will show that digital things have value, that decentralization matters, and political neutrality is going to be a useful feature to have in a currency.
So, David, I don't want to say over to the old guard, but in Jimmy's words, David, I'll give you a minute. Away you go.
Right. I mean, think about this. If you think about innovation, right? Telephone, the invention of telephone was a major breakthrough. The invention of basically computer was a major breakthrough. They basically, personal computers, there used to be one secretary per basically worker on Wall Street. Now one secretary services probably 30 workers on Wall Street. So there's no doubt that innovations generally have been associated with productivity growth, that raising basically standard of living of everybody. Bitcoin is a joke. Yes, basically blockchain sounds like a very cute idea, mining and those kind of things, but it doesn't produce anything at all. It hasn't raised the standard of living of anybody, has not changed our lives. It basically has been one great Ponzi scheme in the sense that it's become a major, basically, basic vehicle for speculation, for people who are talking about things that they don't really understand. Yeah, Jimmy was exactly right, which is amazing. I mean, he said, well, people don't understand Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's been around for 10 years. If people still don't understand it, maybe there's something wrong with Bitcoin. I think from that point of view, in fact, the fact it's gone up so much when nobody understands it actually shows that perhaps it's ignorance that's been driving up its price. Again, I don't think Bitcoin's history has not given me any reason to believe that it's going to be here to stay.
All right, gentlemen, it has been quite a debate. I want to thank you both very much for your considered opinions and your powerful perspectives. It's been a pleasure having you both on the show. It's been very energizing and it's been great to hear both your views. So for all of you watching, whatever side you fell on, let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. That's all for now.